Good morning, Year 5. Today we are going to be editing our diary entry that we should have wrote last week. So as you already know, all these slides can be found on the website and they can be used alongside this video or by themselves as well. Okay, so before we begin, I would like everyone to have a go at this starter to identify word classes. So read through the different tasks, and when you have finished, press play to continue. So as I already mentioned, today we're going to be editing our writing. So if you are working on bronze, you will be editing your work to improve spelling and punctuation. Silver, complete bronze, then consider whether you can improve your vocabulary. And gold, complete silver, then consider whether you can restructure your sentences to improve them. So obviously this is something you've done many, many times in school, but it's always good to have a reminder of how to do this. If you find that you've whizzed through bronze very quickly because you're working on bronze, do have a go at silver and gold. So as you already know, it's always very important to refer to your success criteria and your assessment grid when you are editing. So the success criteria is something that you would have created at the beginning of a piece of writing, and then you always have this to refer to during the writing process. And obviously it's important to look at these whilst editing, just to make sure that we are including all those excellent features to make our writing more varied and more dynamic and interesting. So whilst you are editing, we would like you to check carefully for your spelling. Now it can be quite tricky to know when we spelled something wrong, but if you are unsure of a word or it doesn't look quite right, use a dictionary to check. Another thing we would look at carefully during our editing would be punctuation to make sure that we've got all of those sentences punctuated correctly. So I'm just going to take you through some model some of the things that we might want to correct. I can't go through all aspects of punctuation, of course, but I will cover some just to remind you, just to jog your memory of how we would use certain types of punctuation. So, number 1, check there are commas after fronted subordinate clauses before and after embedded clauses. So, for example, with a fierce scowl on his face, Mr. Sir walked towards me. So in this sentence, I have included a fronted subordinate clause just to make our sentence more varied, to vary sort of the sentence structure. And of course, I have included that very important comma, which is absolutely essential after using a fronted subordinate clause before continuing with my sentence. So in a minute, I would like you to pause the video and have a go at writing your own sentence with a fronted subordinate clause, and of course remembering your comma at the end of this. And when you're ready, press play. So as well as making sure that we're correctly including commas, make sure that you have used brackets, dashes and commas correctly when you are using parenthesis. For example, we walked across the desert, a barren and dry place, until we arrived at a network of holes. So, in this sentence, I have included parenthesis, and this is embedded into the sentence with a dash on either side of it. So during your editing process, make sure that you have correctly done this and you are always remembering that important punctuation on either side of your parenthetic clause. Now, like you did previously, I would like you to have a go at writing a sentence, including a parenthetic clause. And when you are ready, press play to move on. So another area of punctuation that we need to be using correctly in Year 5 are semicolons and colons. So we've already had a lesson on semicolons during this unit of work, so on holes. So, for example, we wolfed down our breakfast. We were all ravenous. So here we have used a semicolon instead of a conjunction. A conjunction might be because. So for example, we wolfed down our breakfast because we were all ravenous, but we have replaced that with a semicolon. And that is one way we could use this type of punctuation. So I would like you to write a sentence using a semicolon instead of a conjunction. When you have done that, press the video to continue. Now, another way we might use semicolons and colons would be when we are writing a list. So, for example, Mr. Sir wore colon a denim shirt semicolon black leather boots, a suede hat with a round rim, and a checkered shirt. So for this sentence, before the listing of items, we have included a colon, and between every item, we include a semicolon. So I would like you just to have a quick go at writing a sentence including a descriptive list, and also, of course, including colons and semicolons. And when you are ready, press play to move on. So the last area of punctuation I would like to remind you of is, of course, full stops and capital letters. This seems like a very simple thing, and most of you do this without even thinking, but it is always good to be reminded because it can be forgotten. So another important thing whilst we are reading is to make sure that our sentences actually make sense. So in order to do this, reread your work to yourself, and obviously you'll be doing this anyway as you go along when you edit, and then you could ask a member of your family to read it as well, just to make sure that all of those sentences are correctly put together and make sense. Now, another one of your targets was to include adverbials of time. Again, this is something that seems really simple, but it's often something that is forgotten. And these lists should have been made when you were doing your plan for your writing. So making sure you're including those adverbials of time at the beginning of sentences, followed by commas, of course, and that high quality vocabulary, which is so important to make our writing more varied and intriguing and engaging for the reader. So the next thing I'm going to do is just to take you through this paragraph and make some additions myself, just to remind you of how we would do this. And for this paragraph, I'm going to be focusing on vocabulary and sentence structure. So this morning I was woken by someone roughly shaking my shoulders. It was 4 a.m. and the stars still glittered in the vast sky overhead. Now I think we can make this sentence a bit more dynamic with an additional clause. So I'm going to use a single dash to add some extra information. An infinite number of twinkling lights in a dark void. So it was 4 a.m. and the stars still glittered in the vast sky overhead. An infinite number of twinkling lights in the dark void. Feeling stiff, I rolled out of bed and pulled on my orange overalls. Now, we could definitely make this adjective more interesting. So I am going to turn it into a hyphenated adjective. Hyphenated because we have included a hyphen in between these two words. So a hyphenated adjective to describe the noun, which is overalls. The other boys and I slowly trudged into the hall, blinking sleepily as the bright artificial lights greeted us. We began to line up, and X-ray barged in front of me. Again, this sentence is quite short, and I feel like we can make it a bit more dynamic by including an additional clause. So we began to line up, and X-ray who seemed like the leader of the pack barged in front of me. So I have included a relative clause here to describe the noun which precedes it. So that would be X-ray. With this relative clause, we are describing X-ray. So later on, the sun slowly rose and its rays began to warm the desert. Scorching and bare, the land was lit up. Now, I think I'm going to make an improvement on the vocabulary here. So I'm going to say scorching and barren. Just turn that into purple so you can see where I've made the changes. Scorching and barren, the land was lit up. I dug, slowly. My whole body was contorted as I strained every muscle in tortuous exertion that I was not used to. My hands were in pain. Now, I think we can all agree that we can make this final sentence a bit more interesting. So my hands were in pain. I felt confused and sad. So as I went through previously, I've used a semicolon here instead of a conjunction to add an additional clause. Right, so I've made several improvements to this paragraph. I would like you to pause the video in a minute and think of 3 ways that you would like to change this paragraph. So 3 things that you might improve upon or change or revise. And when you are ready, press play to move on. So just make sure as you go through your writing that you're including all of the features on your assessment criteria, assessment grid and success criteria, just to make sure that those your writing, as I said before, is all the more dynamic and interesting and engaging for the reader. And when you have finished editing your writing, there are 2 reflection shapes that you can have a go at. So what are you most pleased with in your writing and why? And what would be your next step and why? Okay, thank you very much, Year 5.